Welcome to the Muck Boots in the Capitol 2025 end of session wrap up with Friends of Family Farmers. Today is July 16th, 2025, and we are talking about the 2025 Oregon State Legislative Long Session. Whoops. My name is Alice Morrison. I am the co-executive director of policy and development for Friends of Family Farmers, and I'm in charge of our policy program. So I will be talking with you today about what happened in the Oregon State Legislature. So today we are going to go over our two priorities. So the two bills that FoFF brought to the legislature. And then we're going to talk about things that we were following, some things that we were heavily supportive of or heavily involved in, and then some things that we were just watching and some trends. So we're going to talk about things that passed first, and then we're going to talk about things that didn't pass, and then we're going to talk about why we think that is, some analysis of this session as a whole and some opportunities moving forward. But first, FoFF's advocacy is by and for our community. We are a grassroots organization. We do not receive a lot of grant funding for our policy work specifically, and we take pride that we are representing the 1,600 small, mid-sized, highly diversified, and local market farmers across the state who help to make not only our programs successful, but also to bring our community food system forward into the future. So we are in our summer membership drive. Please consider heading over to www.friendsofamilyfarmers.org/donate and making a donation to support the work you're going to hear about today. Thanks so much. All right, today we're going to start off with FoFF's priorities. And if those of you who've been to some of our weekly Muck Boots in the Capitol updates, we did weekly briefings on Mondays at noon every week of the session. It was a new thing that we tried out this year in 2025. I really liked it. I thought it was a great way to keep folks updated. If you are looking for any of those weekly briefings, you can find them all on our YouTube channel. And I think that's something that we will continue to do going forward, because it was just a really easy way to have a consistent place where we could talk about our priorities. So the two things, we're going to start with context of why we chose these two things. Friends of Family Farmers, like I said, we're a grassroots organization. So every 2 years, we go through a pretty rigorous data collection process, and we reach out to our community to hear what they think is the most important thing for us to be working on. And this year, well, this biennium, we do this every 2 years, and we did it in 2024 to determine what we would work on for 2025 and the subsequent short session in 2026. And two things that really rose to the top were small farm water access and our continued focus on making state meat inspection possible here in Oregon through the state meat inspection program. And so we tackled these through the state meat inspection program bill that we brought forward. HB 2164 is the vehicle that ended up taking, and our small farm water access commercial garden bill, which ended up being HB 3372. So the reason that we were working on state meat inspection staffing in 2025 was because meat inspection in general has been a bottleneck for small and independent producers in the state of Oregon for more than a decade. We've identified this over and over and over again. And it's really important that the farmers that we work with who operate outside of feedlot and contract systems have a way to legally bring their product to market. And there are disincentives in the economics of meat processing for people in this very vertically integrated system to work with independent and small producers. And we understand that it's the economics of the industry. And therefore, we have always advocated for state and local level solutions to this that include some, creative ways forward. So the state meat inspection program is something that we worked with many lawmakers and other groups in 2020 to help the legislature authorize. And then ODA developed the program, got their cooperative agreement going with USDA in 2022, and Oregon has also set aside, or has already distributed rather, $11 million of grant funding for new facilities to be brought up to state and USDA inspected standards. So that was $2 million in 2021 and $9 million allocated in 2023. But the staffing for this program, as those facilities that they invested in through the grant program come online, the staffing for the program has not kept up, and there was no dedicated staff time allocated to inspector positions in this program in ODA's budget in the last biennium. And this is something that we've been tracking, we've been trying to find a solution for. So we worked with ODA to put together a proposal this year to try to fix this. On the small farm water access side, after we do the context, I'll talk about the path of these bills individually. The small farm water access commercial garden side, since 1955, it has been required for anyone growing any amount of crops for sale to do so using an irrigation water right. Either you hold that water right, either you purchase in from an irrigation district which holds a water right, or you're paying a city water bill and essentially using the city's water right to grow that food. But if you were using a domestic well, you were allowed to irrigate a half acre with any amount of water that you chose, as long as that was not for any commercial purpose, that irrigation. So you could grow whatever you wanted with no water limitations on a half acre, but the moment that you sold one zucchini out of that garden, you were violating the law. And you also were allowed to use 5,000 gallons per day for any commercial or industrial purpose besides irrigated agriculture. And so these two things combined, these existing exemptions, created a system where folks, thought that if they were within that half acre, within that 5,000 gallons, then they must fall into one of those categories. And enforcement changed in fall of 2023 when we saw a lot of water masters around the state take a much more activist approach to this system. It was complaint driven in most parts of the state before fall of 2023. And we saw a lot more robust enforcement going out, folks realizing that they had no other options and that their businesses were going to be shut down. But being very, very frustrated that if they were irrigating that half acre for personal use, what they're doing wouldn't be illegal. Or if they were using that same amount of water for a different type of business that wasn't farming, what they're doing would not be illegal. So we saw this as an inconsistency that's holding back our community food system and wanted to make a change to allow folks the options. Oh, all right. So what did we propose in the realm of state meat inspection? So HB 2164 was to add 2 FTE to ODA's staffing for meat inspectors. So with meat inspection, you have to have folks present to do the activity of slaughter and processing for most parts of it. And so needing that consistency and availability around the state, especially in underserved locations, very rural locations, that kind of thing, is really, really crucial to being able to provide these services to the farmers who are depending on them. Without access to an inspected facility, farmers only really have one option. They can use a custom exempt facility if they're able to sell live animal shares, which just severely limits your market because not every customer is able to purchase meat in bulk on the hoof, so to speak, and that they would not be able to drop, $500 to $800, perhaps more, on bulk meat at a time. It's not something that all markets can afford, and it really limits your customer base. And so state or federal inspected facilities are necessary for anyone who wants to sell meat by the cut. So we saw this as a way to add some staffing to ODA to be able to meet the demand of the new facilities that are opening and keep those promises to farmers. And we said FTE, not 2 positions. So we wanted to make sure that they had the option to spread this staff availability over multiple positions if they chose. The fiscal impact of this bill was about $275,000 per biennium, as assessed by the Legislative Budget Office. And so that was the bill that we went into the session with. This bill had a very favorable, very early hearing in the House Agriculture Committee where it originated. So this was a committee bill for House Agriculture, Land Use, Water, and Natural Resources. It was a very long committee name. You all are aware of that. But that had a very favorable, very early hearing, about 30 testimonies from farmers across the state. We had no registered opposition at all. No one spoke out against this measure. It passed out of that committee unanimously in early February. So very, very early in the session. It was like the second week of session that we were able to move this bill out of committee. And it was listed as a priority by the House Ag Committee co-chairs for the Ways and Means Natural Resources Subcommittee. But this bill did not end up having a hearing in the Ways and Means subcommittee. It did not pass, and it was not awarded funding in the reconciliation bill. And to add some insult to injury here, there were further cuts to CSL at ODA for continuing service level at ODA. That means that this program now even has a little bit less capacity than it did at the beginning of the session. So that's something that we are going to continue to lean on our legislators heavily to say, hey, what are we doing here? What are we, how are we going to fill this gap? How are we going to help people be able to legally bring their product to market? Not funding this program, the state meat inspection program, only hurts the small independent growers that our state seems to be so proud of when we talk about Oregon agriculture. So very disappointing outcome here. We're going to talk about the budget realities of the session, but this is something that we obviously are going to continue to work on. We've been working on this issue for over a decade, and we will continue to pay very close attention to the state meat inspection program and make sure that we're doing everything in our power to allow our farmers to stay independent of the contract factory farm system and bring their independent product to market. So disappointing outcome there, but I do want to shout out to all of the producers, all of the folks who stood up for this, all of the folks who came to our rally day on March 4th and talked about this issue. We talked about a lot of issues on that day, including this and the commercial garden bill that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But we did all of our due diligence here, and it truly is a victim of circumstance, in my opinion, that this bill did not make it through. So more to come in future sessions, I am sure. All right, so switching over to small farm water access, our commercial garden bill, what was the solution that was on the table? So this one took many different forms throughout the discussions. There were a lot of voices at the table, as there always are with water issues. Water is everyone's. It belongs to the public. Water is life. Water is very essential. And therefore, of course, there are a lot of stakeholders coming to the table for this issue. So what was settled on as a viable solution was to allow that half acre that you're already allowed to irrigate to be used for either commercial or personal purposes, whatever you decide, in whatever proportion you decide. You could use all of it commercial, all of it personal, any mix in between. And to, for the first time, impose a gallon limit on the amount of irrigation that you can have on that half acre, and that is 3,000 gallons per day. We are very confident that that is enough water to grow pretty much anything you want on that half acre. According to all of the agricultural sciences things from OSU and all of the experts that were consulted, this is definitely a number that gives people the ability to produce whatever food that they would like on that half acre. It's an appropriate number. We're comfortable with it. But whatever you use up to 3,000 gallons for that irrigation of that half acre, plus whatever you use for your other commercial activity allowance, this must not equal no more than 5,000 gallons. So essentially, if you are using all of your 3,000 gallons of your irrigation on your half acre, then you get 2,000 additional gallons for your commercial usage, not the full 5,000 gallon allowance that was in the law before. So those two things have to add up to 5,000. So we thought this was a very elegant solution, and thank you so much to the co-chairs Hellman Owens for working with us on this issue and helping us find this elegant solution, that there is a way forward that's within the gallon limitations and footprint of the current law, but allows people the option to grow produce and farm products for sale on your domestic well. And that came with a couple other caveats throughout the process. There were concerns expressed from the Lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area. That local community was like, hey, we are, as everyone knows, and we're going to talk about this later, but there continues to be a water quality crisis from the nitrate contamination in that area. That is a groundwater management area, has been for decades. And they asked that they be excluded because they are in the middle of emergency designations and a lot of remediation work that's being negotiated there and being completed there. And so they don't want to have another factor in the mix. So that community asked to not allow this exemption to be used within the confines of the groundwater management area. That's in the bill. That's okay. There is a sunset on that clause that they can choose to extend if the community still thinks that's necessary. Also, cannabis is excluded as an eligible commercial crop. So the half acre is designed to be, well, not designed, it's from the existing law. But the argument here is also that this will make farmland more accessible for folks who don't have access to hundreds and hundreds of acres of traditionally good farmland, but want to have some autonomy over how their food is produced, start a farm business that they can use as a stepping stone to qualifying for FSA or USDA loans to get a larger piece of land, what have you. But cannabis is one of those crops that could contribute to a rise in demand or pricing for these small parcels that have domestic wells because of the pure cash driven interest in cannabis. And so that is the reason that it is excluded as an eligible crop. That is something that there was conversation about during the session, and there are some folks who want to revisit it in the future. There was an amendment to clarify that if you have a license to grow industrial hemp, you can use this exemption for a half acre on your domestic well. I will note that it is not necessarily commercially viable to grow only 1/2 acre of industrial hemp. So that would have to be a supplemental thing to a larger operation. But that is something to consider when thinking about the implementation of this law. So what happened? It passed. There was a lot of controversy on this topic, but we came to, like I said, an elegant solution. We gathered some awesome, awesome allies around us from all over the spectrum of folks who work on these types of issues. Want to shout out specifically to the Oregon Farmers Market Association, Water League, the Permaculture Land Use Group, the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, the State Grange of Oregon, the Oregon Organic Coalition, Lane County Farmers Market, and High Desert Farm and Food Alliance, who all signed on to our floor letter, as well as High Desert Partnerships from the Burns area who testified on this bill. It was really great to see so much support. We also had 296 individual testimonies in favor of this bill. Thank you so much to all the people who came out and supported this topic and all of the coordinated effort that went into it. We had several hearings on this bill, lots of twists and turns along the way, but it did pass. It has been signed by the governor, and it has an effective date of January 1st. So right now, we are in this place where this bill has passed, but what it makes legal is not legal right now. It's not legal until January 1st. So I think that everyone can use that for their own risk management. But we are working with OWRD and OSU Extension and Small Farms Program on the implementation of this bill, and look forward to a presentation from our staff and team at Small Farms School at Clackamas Community College with OSU Extension in September. I believe it's on September 10th. Brittany can back me up on that. And we will also be working with those folks to put out educational materials and make sure folks are ready for implementation and ready on January 1st to take advantage of this new opportunity. All right, so I'm just checking my time here. We're going to go a little bit quickly through some of these things. We're going to pause on a couple that we were more involved in. And my goal is to wrap us up at the top of the hour so that we can discuss for the last half hour and ask any questions, ask me to revisit any of the topics we've talked about. So be aware that these next slides have a lot of information on them. All right, so things that passed. Good news. Oregon Farm to School was awarded $10.2 million in the Oregon Department of Education budget. Double Up Food Bucks was awarded $4.3 million in the Department of Human Services budget. The Oregon Ag Heritage Program, which does conservation management plans and conservation easement work across the state, was awarded $2 million for granting out for those projects, plus admin and staffing for the project in the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board budget. There was a bill that was passed, HB 2541, that passed new protections for ag workers to take breaks for milk expression. So breastfeeding mothers, people who need to take breaks in order to express breast milk, now have more protections in Oregon law. That's wonderful. SB 809 includes poultry in the state meat inspection program. So although we don't have the inspector positions and we lost some staff for the program, they did expand the definition of what was included, because when they got the authorization from the legislature to take on the project in 2020, it wasn't explicit that this was for poultry and for four-legged amenable species in the wording of it, so they weren't able to pursue that. And now they clarified that so that poultry facilities can be licensed under the state meat inspection program in areas where they can accommodate that. So we view that as a good thing. More good news is that the water well abandonment repair and replacement fund at OWRD did receive $2 million in the budget reconciliation. That was in a bill that we supported early in the session. I believe it was like 2167 or 2168, HB 2167. And that had both the well abandonment repair and replacement fund and some provisions for the rural septic assistance funds. The septic assistance funds were not included in the reconciliation bill, and that bill, the original bill, did not end up passing, but the well abandonment repair and replacement fund at OWRD did receive $2 million in budget reconciliation. The Marion Polk Food Share, which does operate many food security and sovereignty programs in the Marion County and Polk County area, did receive their funds for a new facility. It's just over $6 million in the reconciliation fund. The Oregon Farm Worker Disaster Relief Fund did receive $2 million in reconciliation. Although, and this is another one, the Oregon Farm Worker Disaster Relief Fund and the AgriStress Hotline, I think they both had independent bills. The bills themselves did not pass, but they were included in the budget reconciliation bill at the end of the session. The AgriStress Hotline received $200,000 in the budget reconciliation bill. And the OSU AgriStress Hotline is the mental health hotline for farmers and agricultural workers generally in the state. And as we know, mental health is something that's often really overlooked by our community because there's always more to do. There's always work to be done. But we also know that farming is a very stressful and high risk industry, and that you're combating a lot of things that you don't have any control over. You don't know what the weather is going to do. You can't control storms. There are other things like, you know, pathogens. We've thought a lot about highly pathogenic avian influenza this year. There are outside factors that can really devastate your business, and that can take a really big mental toll. It's also living rurally and working on farms can be isolating if you don't have a strong community around you. And it is really important that we take mental health in our work seriously. And so we're very happy to see the AgriStress Hotline being funded for another biennium. Also, HB 2947 directs OSU to study the impact of PFAS, which are forever chemicals applied to land. I believe that one had a companion bill in the Senate, which didn't pass, but the House bill did pass. And that's a common strategy, to have both a House version and a Senate version to hedge your bets. And this time, the House version went through, and that study has to be out and presented to the legislature by September of 2028. So look forward to that. We're heartened to see that moving forward. And then good-ish news, these are two bills that we supported that had really, really substantive changes. So I just want to point that out. HB 2548 is a bill that was put forward by PCUN, our friends, the Farm Worker Union of Oregon. And this started out as a Farm Worker Labor Standards Board. FoFF was a participant in the legislative working group that was called together around this before its hearings. We testified in favor of this to give farm workers more of a voice in the labor standards and bring farm workers and farm owners together to create labor standards as a community rather than relying on the legislature to impose them. That was a very controversial topic. It also took on just cause termination in the farm world. And that ended up not being able to move forward as is and was revised to be a comprehensive study of farm worker labor conditions in Oregon conducted by PSU. That bill did pass. And so we are supportive of the changes, but wanted to acknowledge that it is not where it started out. And this is going to be a road that we will go down together with farm workers and farmers hand in hand to find the best way forward for our industry. And we look forward to helping our farmers participate in the study and to seeing its results come out. This should be SB 1154. I apologize. SB 1154 was the governor's groundwater bill. This was the bill that that Governor Kotek put forward pretty late in the session, but was supposed to address the problems in the Lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area and would really the early versions of the bill did impose some substantive changes to mandatory actions and inspections and evaluations that water managers could use in places where there are documented pollution problems. Like the Lobguama has been a problem for a long time. There's documentation going back decades. Nitrate poisoning is having a huge, huge impact on the public health of the community there. And folks do not have options for clean water in that area. And that bill also drew a lot of scrutiny from industry and ended up being amended in a way that ultimately Oregon Rural Action, which is a group based in the Lobguama area, based out there in Morrow County, they actually ended up withdrawing their support from the bill and saying that it did not move anything past the status quo. And so FoFF ultimately withdrew its support. It doesn't make the status quo worse, but we do not think that this is enough to fix the problem and are looking for future and further solutions for water quality for groundwater management areas across the state. Although the Lobguama is the one that gets the most attention. It has the most serious contamination. We do have 3 groundwater management areas in our state currently. And these kind of groundwater bills do apply to all of those groundwater management areas. There's one, of course, in the Lower Umatilla Basin up in Morrow and Umatilla counties. There's one in Malheur County. And there's one where I am sitting right now in the South Willamette Valley, kind of between Junction City and Harrisburg and the I-5 corridor between I-5 and the river. And that is kind of between 99 and I-5, rather. And that is something that I think we should all take seriously as rural residents who drink well water and have to think about those things. So we do await further action here because that is not enough. What was passed in SB 1154 is not enough to keep those folks safe and to make their drinking water adequate and safe for the future. So we're looking forward to continuing those conversations and pushing our government to deliver on those promises as well. All right. And then I included, there were 4 bills that I think are kind of just funny that were passed this year to have new honorifics for Oregon related to agriculture. The 3rd Tuesday of March is now Oregon Farmer Rancher Day, according to HB 3141 that's passed. SB 584 designates February as Oregon Truffle Month. So those of you who participate in, I know the Oregon Truffle Festival happens here in Eugene. And we do have, especially on the west side of the state, a climate and ecosystem that allows for those delicious little underground treats. So SB 547 designates April as Oregon Native Plant Appreciation Month. So look out for that. Maybe there's some ways that we can incorporate, native plant knowledge and ecological farming into those celebrations where we can all learn together about Oregon's ecosystems. And also SCR 13 designates the T-bone as the official Oregon state steak. There you go. Hey, who knew? I sure didn't know, but now I do. Okay, well, I wanted to do something a little funny before we talk about things that did not pass. And as you can imagine from my preface earlier with the state meat inspection program, um, we had a really, really rough budget year. This was the way that the state determines the budget is through revenue forecasting. And so the state economists and the legislative budget office, they determine through revenue forecasting how much money will be available for the state to spend, and the state is required to pass a balanced budget each biennium. And when May 14th rolled around, that was the last revenue forecast for this session's budgeting purposes. And there was a really, really big deficit. The number is escaping me, but it was several $100 million that we thought we would have, that we did not end up happening. So that means that there were a lot of things that we thought were going to be common sense investments for the state that did not end up receiving any funding this year. And also, just for context, usually what is considered a big ticket item, we wouldn't have, in a normal budget year, we wouldn't have considered our meat processing inspection request to be a big ticket item. Anything under about $500,000 to $1 million is not generally considered in sessions past. This year it was different. But it is not generally considered to be a big ticket item when it comes to 2 years of government funding. And so that's why we felt so confident with all of the support that we experienced in the House Ag Committee, and that we knew how vital that meat processing program was. And going in with a fiscal impact of only $273,000 for a 2-year program, we felt very confident, and that this budget year kind of shattered that illusion that we had. So with that context in mind, bad news, things that did not pass and did not receive funding. There were cuts to agency budget CSL, so continuing service level, across the board. So we are hearing about, as we heard about ODA having to cut an additional position at the meat inspection program. Also, HB 2979 were the food system resilience grant funds that were administered by the Oregon Community Food Systems Network and the Oregon Farmers Market Association. This was not a new program, but it was authorized only with one-time funding in 2023. And unfortunately, because it wasn't included in an agency budget or considered multi-year, it was considered for this grant, for this purpose, a new or one-time program. And so it did not receive any funds at this time. We worked very hard with our allies at OFMA and Farmers Market Fund and Oregon Climate and Agriculture Network and Oregon Community Food Systems Network to push forward that program, because those grants have had a really, really, really tangible and impactful ripple across our communities in making our small farms and ranches, food hubs, and farmers markets more resilient to climate-related disasters, wildfires, smoke, market cancellations, heat domes, ice storms, all of those things. The investments that folks have been able to make with that money that was dispersed after being awarded in 2023 has really, really seen a really wonderful, wonderful change for our folk across the country. Well, not country, state. I'm sorry. It is really hard to see a program that had hundreds and hundreds of people benefit from it, as well as hundreds of people stand up and say, this is important, we need this. We conducted, us and ORCAN and Farmers Market Fund and OCFSN and OFMA conducted more than 100 legislator meetings between ORCAN's meetings, FMF's meetings, and FoFF's Rally Day meetings. We conducted meetings with more than 100 individual meetings. There are only 90 state legislators, so I can't say we met with more than 100 state legislators. We met with many offices multiple times. We were very strategic. We got so many co-sponsors, dozens of co-sponsors for this bill. I just want to assure everyone who participated in this campaign, who's on the call today, that we left no stone unturned. And the legacy of this program for now lives on in all the people who, were able to purchase a livestock trailer and then had to evacuate that very same year for wildfire to get their herd out of there. They wouldn't have been able to do that without this program, and we do intend to come back. This is something that has a lot of great structure behind it, has a tangible impact, and is really needed and desired by all of the folks involved. So I just can't say enough good things about this program, and I really want us to be proud of the effort that our community put in. Again, another huge community effort was SB 611, Food for All Oregonians. This bill had the biggest rally day I have ever seen, 400 people. And this was a bill to create the Food for All Oregonians program, which would have been a state level expansion of SNAP eligibility to allow folks who would otherwise qualify for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, if not for their immigration status. So folks who are not US citizens or whose home countries don't have a very specific agreement with the US do not qualify for SNAP based on income alone. They, if you're not a citizen or a citizen of one of these countries that has a specific relationship with the US, that can stand in the way of you getting nutrition assistance, even if you qualify, you live here, you work here, you're part of the community. This bill had a huge amount of public support, did some really wonderful organizing from the Oregon Food Bank and the huge coalition that they put together. And they were also really smart. They phased down the ask in the end of the session to only focus on children ages 0 to 6 as a way to establish the program. And because of the budget outlook, it was ultimately unsuccessful this cycle. But I do anticipate that this effort is not over and that we will come back. I also want to shout out to Senate Bill 887, the ODA Organic Policy Specialist. That is something that our friends at the Oregon Organic Coalition, we are a member of the OOC, and this is a position that we have long known is essential, not to just support certified organic farms, but all those who are using organic practices. This policy specialist is something that other states already have, and it helps them to really make sure that our agricultural policy and the way that it's implemented on an agency level here in Oregon is friendly to the fastest growing sector of agriculture, which is the organic sector. And so we want to make sure that folks who are using those practices are still eligible for all of the programs and incentives that come down through ODA. So we will continue to support that effort in the future. Again, this budget year was really, really difficult. Another thing that we supported heavily, it had a very early hearing. It seemed to have bipartisan and bicameral support across everything, was HB 3010, which would have established mandatory Spanish language pesticide application training. So there are certifications that folks need to have in order to handle and apply restricted pesticides. And those are not required to be provided in Spanish everywhere in the state. Some counties do have more successful programs than others, but these chemicals do need to be handled with care, and we need to have training in languages that people are comfortable and fluent in, so that they can understand and make sure that they are doing the right thing with these chemicals for their own health and the health of the folks who are interacting with them. Because pesticide application is not only for farms, it's a very important thing for many farms, but this also applies to pesticide application in state, county, and city parks, school grounds, all of these things. So it's very important that this training be offered in languages, not only Spanish. This bill only covered Spanish, but we definitely support the efforts of groups like Piccoon, who said during this process that you also need to be offering this in other languages that are the first language of the people doing this work. So this was a good first step. We thought that this was going to be a sure thing. We also know that this was widely supported by ag groups across many different different outlooks and the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts. This is a big priority for them. But again, in this challenging budget space, it was not awarded any funding. We also supported SB 80, which was a more targeted effort to follow up on our work with the Stand Up to Factory Farms Coalition through SB 85, which was passed in 2023, the CAFO reform package. And the SB 80 would have been a more targeted moratorium on scale inappropriate confined animal feeding operations in groundwater management areas specifically. So only those places that have documented pollution problems that cannot handle this type of load would have been targeted to exclude new large CAFO permits in those areas because the environmental impact that poorly managed facilities of that size can have is just not appropriate for places that already have documented environmental harm. But this bill was not passed out of the committee, even though there was a huge outpouring of support. There was also a lot of opposition. I testified at that hearing, and it was very interesting. But the chair of the Senate Natural Resources Committee told us that they did not want to move this bill forward, regardless of the testimony given, because the governor was working to address these issues, and there was a larger movement to address the Lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area, where this scale of CAFO does pose a pretty big, it's a pretty big player in the problem there. But that we already talked about 1154 and how that passed, but was not strong enough to make the local community feel like it was going to do the work that was necessary. So we think that this is an ongoing problem that we are going to continue to have to address, and scale appropriate regulation for agriculture is something that FoFF has always been involved in. There's also another bill in this same vein was SB 747, reporting guidelines for fertilizer applications in sensitive areas on parcels of 200 acres or larger. This bill was something that the Oregon Rural Action folks, the community group in the Guama, also put together to try to see where the differences between agronomic and pollution rate of application for nutrient materials, especially those that contribute to nitrate contamination, where those things are misaligned. So that kind of reporting on larger parcels was the first step. There was no enforcement action here in this bill, but it was not well received by industry, and in my mind, widely misunderstood as a measure for water quality, and did not make it out of committee. Then also, related to the state meat inspection program, the renewal of those grant funds that I mentioned at the beginning, where the state had invested in the past, there was a bill, SB 363, to appropriate $10 million for to continue that grant fund, to continue to build more facilities for meat processing, especially for the state meat inspection program in Oregon. And that bill did not pass out of committee or be awarded any funding. So then there are a couple things that, let me do a time check. Yeah, we're still good. Then there were some issues that did not move this session, but I'm calling neutral news because I know that these conversations are ongoing and something that will, keep moving in the future, and we plan on being very present in and contributing to. So HB 3133 would have changed laws related to farm stands and what activities you are allowed to do on EFU zone land as related to your farm stand. So farm stands are what we call a sub 1 use of EFU zone land, which means that it is just a straight up allowable use. If you are growing product on your farm, you have to have a way to sell it. So farm stands exist as an outlet for the product on your farm. Makes perfect sense, right? There have been a lot of permutations of what a farm stand means. And in 2006, there were some additional things added to the statute, which allow you to have promotional events in your farm stand. And there are groups on all sides of the spectrum, some who want to have more diversified income strategies coming out of your farm stand, and some who want less diversified income strategies coming out of your farm stand. And really what it boils down to is that this conversation is about land use and what competition you're inviting for our working lands here in Oregon. So if you are allowed to do straight up tourism opportunities without a focus or a necessity that the land's primary use be farming, and that your production on these ag lands is central to everything, then that creates competition in the system for land that is traditionally farmland but could be used for tourism opportunities, for hospitality services, all of these things. And so that's where this conversation about farm stands becomes really, really sticky and really important. This bill, HB 3133, was brought forward by the Oregon Property Owners Association. It was in the House Agriculture Committee. There was a legislative working group convened on it, and it was identified as an opportunity where rule changes. So when you pass a law, that's a statute change, but rule changes can be done through an agency process called rulemaking. And they determined that many of the things that people had a problem with could be addressed in rulemaking at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so there is an current rulemaking process that I am a part of. I'm a member of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee appointed by the agency. And that rulemaking process is going on right now. The last meeting of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee is on Friday. Then there will be legal review and draft rules released in the fall, and an opportunity for public comment between now and November 7th. So look out for more information from us about that when we see the new draft rules, and where we think that they should either be looser or tighter, or what's going on. But that's something that did not pass the session that is ongoing. And then also, in that same vein, I believe that there will be more conversations, some of them in rulemaking, some of them outside of rulemaking, about agritourism. That's what DLCD has told us. So look forward to more conversations on those topics, and look forward to FoFF representing our farmers' perspective and asking you if you're one of our farmers. We will have more roundtables, more office hours, more ways to get involved to make sure that small producers' voices are at the table. There are also a lot of land use bills that were proposed this session that didn't end up moving, that I do think will come back, and I do think will be refined in the future. There was a bill about non-farm dwellings on farmland. So dwellings for, additional dwellings for other family members not affiliated with the farm, or for possibly short-term rentals. I'm not exactly that bill, I think, was a little unclear to me, SB 79. And I think that there is something there that folks feel very strongly about, and I look forward to further conversations on the topic. Replacement dwellings is a loophole that has been used a lot, that we see a lot in our FarmLink work, where there's a piece of farmland, maybe it's on the smaller side, maybe it's not like as wide open or cleared, or it doesn't have as strong of a water right, and there is a small home on the it's perhaps original, and then there's a way to build a dwelling on farmland called replacement dwelling, which is if that house is destroyed for any reason, including you knocking it down on purpose, you can replace that dwelling, and there's no limitation on the size of the house that can replace that dwelling. So that creates some problems if you have a dwelling that was like, we have an 800 square foot small original farmhouse from the 20s on this piece of land that somebody wants to farm. That is a different valuation of that land than if someone knocks it down and builds a 2,500 to 3,500 square foot brand new mansion size home on that piece of property. That then becomes a different buyer who's looking at that, and it excludes a lot of the young and beginning farmers who we work with. So we are concerned about that on the smaller parcels, and in general, just what that means for farmland availability. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on, but did not move forward this session. There were two bills about home occupations, which is a way that you can get permits for a business that is not farming on EFU zone land. There was a bill, HB 2455, that would have made it easier to get these permits. And then there was SB 77, which would have made it harder to get those permits. So there's clearly a lot of conversation there. Our concern is that we want to make sure that meaningful meaningful farming production is the primary use of farmland, because we know that farmland is a finite resource. There's not a million, well, there are a million acres, but there is not an infinite amount of acreage that is accessible or useful for farming. And we want to make sure that those lands stay in production, because farming is never going to be optional, because feeding ourselves is never going to be optional. So we want to be very, very clear about the goals of farmland, but we want to allow folks to diversify their income in ways that make sense. Rezoning of ag land, SB 73 was about changing the process by which an individual parcel could be rezoned out of EFU, because right now, in some counties, you're able to apply for a site specific rezone, saying, hey, this isn't productive farmland, it shouldn't be considered EFU, it should be rural residential or something, and that changes what you're allowed to do on that land. So we would like to see a revisit of this system, and perhaps some larger land use planning goals around making sure that we are keeping ag land in production overall. But that bill did not move forward this session. I think there's more discussion needed. Solar siting, there were some proposals kicked around. None of them actually moved forward this session, about making it either, there were proposals to make it more difficult and easier to site solar energy facilities on EFU farmland, and high value farmland. So more discussion is needed on these topics. This is not the last that we're going to hear about them at all. So look forward to hearing more on all of these as we move forward. Okay, we are right on time. And we are going to go into a little bit of analysis, and then I'll turn off the recording and we can hand it over for questions. So there was a very real federal impact on the session this year because of the proposed and now real deep cuts to human services at the federal level, SNAP, Medicaid, all the things in the big beautiful bill. Those things have an impact on a state, because the state feels has to weigh its options in filling that gap as much as it can. And that means diverting funds from other places to fill in those human services gaps. So the Oregon State Legislature did choose to be more conservative than even they needed to with the revenue forecast, is my analysis, and hold back some funding. There's also a very real conversation about the economic impact of foreign policy on the federal level, and whether or not tariff discussions could strengthen the conversation about a recession, where the economy as a whole is going to go, and what resources are going to be necessary from the state to fill gaps or provide services in the future. And then also this divide in the federal political landscape really made it clear that we needed to have bipartisan support in the ag space in order to move anything forward. Luckily, a lot of our things did have very strong bipartisan support. For example, the water bill had bipartisan support. Only one person in the Senate voted against that bill. It was almost unanimous in the Senate floor vote, which is almost unheard of. So that was really great to see. We also had a lot of bipartisan support for our meat processing work and for the disaster resilience grants, but those were trumped by the budget conversation, I will say. And this kind of landscape did make new programs almost impossible to fund this session. I say new because we do know that there were programs who were funded on a one-time basis in the last biennium that were not funded this year, and they were referenced as new programs, even though they already existed, but they were not a fixture in a continuing service level, and therefore considered one time, which is not the norm in the state legislature. Usually there is a little bit more weight behind a program that has been funded and has, provable results. So those were some things that were heightened and worsened by the federal situation, and we definitely felt that this session. There are some opportunities for additional funding in the next couple years. Come on, little buddy, there we go. So there was hinted that there may be a special session in September That is up to the governor, and it also usually is very topic driven. So when a special session is announced, the governor will say why, and anything outside of that topic scope is not going to be discussed. There's also what we call the e-board or the emergency board. There was $150 million set aside in the e-board budget this year for disaster relief and resilience. We think that that wording is likely to do with wildfire related spending, and that will be convened later in the fall once the rain starts, maybe the winter. And if we end up not having a horrible wildfire season this year and all of that money is not needed, then there may be an opportunity for us to return some of those to ask for some of those disaster resilience funds to be returned to those programs, but it really depends how the wildfire season goes and how much of a burden that ends up being. But I am crossing my fingers. I don't want to jinx anybody. I know that there are fires currently happening in southern and central Oregon, and we are hoping that they are not. We don't continue to have the worst fire year on record over and over and over again. But the state did set some money aside to be able to pay those bills if things are really, really difficult. Also, we will have a short session in 2026. Depending on what happens at the federal government and with the economy overall, we may have the opportunity to request more funds from the state for some of these programs that didn't get funded this year. Just kind of waiting and seeing how that goes based on what the economy and what the economic outlook looks like at the beginning of 2026. But the thing that I really want to emphasize this year is that people did it. You really showed up. We had hundreds of people write written testimony, 300 on the water bill alone, hundreds more across all of our other issues. Oral testimony, we had people driving to Salem multiple times for issues that they believe in. We had sign-on letters going around. There were almost 300 signatures on the disaster resilience sign-on letter. You all heard from us last week about the outcomes there. The FoFF Small Farms Mean Business Rally Day returned to the Capitol this year. We had 84 farmers come out and really get involved. Like, you met with your legislators in person. We marched in Salem. The Caesar the No Drama Llama was there. It was amazing. So I really encourage you all to feel really, really good that we did not leave any stones unturned. And if we hadn't shown up, we would have lost a lot more. So I think that, we also hosted some farm tours and legislator events to really connect our legislators, especially those that don't have a personal ag background, to the people that we serve. And that was really meaningful and helpful in providing them context for why we do the work that we do and who we're actually talking about when we say Oregon small farms. So thank you for showing up this year. It did make a difference. And if we hadn't shown up in the levels that we did, we would 100% not have passed the commercial garden water bill. Definitely not. If we hadn't have pushed as hard as we did, that is a victory for the community. Definitely. And that is because people showed up and did what needed to be done to talk about the impact on your community and you personally and what it means to grow food. So I think we should all be very proud about the way that the small farm community showed up this year, and we'll continue to do so in the future. And movement building takes all of us, and it takes all the time. So we'll always be here for you if you're here for us. And thank you so much. Now we'll go to questions.